Joined by Peter Major from Cadiz Corporate Solutions, and on the line we have Jonathan Veeran, Senior Associate at Webber Wentzel. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. Peter, let's start off with you and let's delve into those numbers. Still maintaining that 26% black ownership target by mines by 2014, and let's just unpack the fact that the black economic employment equity, 40% stays the same, but with a change that it's got to be at various levels as well. Peter, your view on this?
Gee, I think that was the hardest part to really define, and I didn't hear Franz talking very well down here. So I'm kind of battling to get the definition of that. The 26% BE, nobody thought that was going to change. We didn't think it was going to go up because it's getting so hard to realize it. And there's lots of controversy over how that's being measured, because a lot of measurements, whether it's done by McGregor, the JSE, the Human Resource Council, or the DMR, they all have different numbers. So we have to agree on definitions before people agree on a way forward. If a guy thinks he's 22%, and he's convinced he's 22%, and the government thinks he's only 9 or 10, that guy's not going to change very much the way he's attempting to get to 26. So I think we got to define the definitions. Also, under the new charter, mining groups will procure 70% of services. Well, what's a service? Is it labor? Because we know labor is 55% of mining costs. Is it electricity? Well, that means it's all from Eskom, so we assume Eskom's black controlled. All these things need definitions for us to go forward, to make sense out of.
Well, Jonathan, good afternoon. It's Stephen here. You were actually at the unveiling of that new charter this morning. What are your views? Do you agree with Peter that there is some sort of vagueness and a difficulty in trying to actually measure how these targets are reached?
Yes, Stephen, I agree with Peter's views, and that's the difficulty with this revised charter, is that there's a lot of uncertainty. Like its predecessor, there's a lot of new definitions that have been inserted, and unfortunately from a regulatory perspective, it's a document which is difficult to read. That said, there are positives, the positive being that the equity target has remained the same. As Peter mentioned, it's difficult to define what that means. But of course, they've also introduced this concept of meaningful economic participation, which means that BEE deals in future will be structured differently. The one point being that there would be some sort of cash flow for BEE beneficiaries, and secondly, BEE beneficiaries will be allowed to leverage their debt under this new revised charter. The second point is that the charter somewhat misguidedly says that BE beneficiaries will have full shareholders' voting rights. That may be problematic under the old and the new Companies Act, as only shareholders are entitled to voting rights, and a BE beneficiary, due to the financing structure, may not always have that right up front.
Peter, looking at some of the comments by Susan Shabangu, and obviously the biggest issue right now is that most mines are white-owned and only 8.9% are black-owned, and that, of course, deviates quite largely from the current 15% target. Why do you think that there's been such a lag, Peter? Is it the lack of skills or just the lack of interest?
No, there's no lack of interest. You look at all the people applying for permits. Everybody's interested in getting it, but there's a lack of skills, there's a real lack of money, there's a real lack of risk appetite. So while the banks might have money, are they going to risk it to people who are very inexperienced? And I think one thing every 50 million people in this country better remember: starting a business is very hard, running a business is probably even harder, and making money is harder than even those other two. And so it's a lot different than in the 1960s, the United States legislated there would be no more apartheid, that blacks could go to any university they wanted, blacks could get on any bus, any train, go in any shop they wanted. That was tough enough to implement, as we all know. But now to say a disadvantaged race for hundreds of years now has to own 26%, you can't just create entrepreneurs. Ask any venture capitalist firm how many fail, and these are smart people with big backing. That's what's so difficult here, is we're not just legislating equality, we're legislating entrepreneur ownership. Capitalism is a tough game.
Well, Jonathan, considering how badly we missed the targets last year, 8.9% against a 15% target by the end of last year, do you think we can meet this target in time by 2014? And what sort of censure will there be on companies who don't meet the target by that stage?
Well, it's difficult to say. I agree with Peter's point that finding financiers for these transactions has proved difficult. And that may be, or the 8.9% percentages that the minister referred to this afternoon could be the reason. That could be the reason behind that low percentage. In terms of enforceability, I think it's constitutionally problematic that the revised charter, which is essentially a document which has been agreed to by Labour, to some extent business, and government, has now been given the force of law. And if you look at the penalties that can be imposed, they're quite severe, and it may include the revocation of a mining right or a prospecting right, which will cease, and a mine will be required to cease mining as a result.
Peter, well, just taking a look at the administration side of things, and when it comes to prospecting rights, we have heard, and of course I'm alluding to something that Peter Leon from Webber Wentzel was saying last week, that we need to depoliticize it and of course take it out of the department, perhaps handled by a separate body, and of course alluding to the administration side of things. Do you think that is going to be the ultimate solution? And of course this also just brings into question political wranglings as well in the mining industry.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways of solving this, but I think that's the most practical, and that's the most proven. Namibia got a lot of their ideas from Estonia. Estonia is one of the corrupt former Eastern European countries that Russia decimated, took over, has recently regained its freedom since 1990. Estonia, you have an ID card, you can go in and do any government tender, apply for a driver's license, file your tax, it's all electronically tracked. There's zero corruption, zero favoritism, zero room for interference. Now, Namibia is learning from Estonia, so are a few other countries. There's much better systems than what we got. Is there the political will to do this? You've got 400 clothing manufacturers that flat out refuse to pay more than 90 to 120 a week to their workers, and the government knows who they are, and they can't even implement that. So I'm worried that government won't take a left field, a brand new dramatic approach. They like this system, unfortunately, the way it is, I think.
Peter, how do you think that these changes to the mining charter will be viewed by investors?
They're going to be viewed a little bit negatively. Hopefully not more than a little bit. But they're not going to be viewed positively because there's such a gap between where we are now and what these requirements are. And they just see more hammers, more sticks, and there's less carrots. There seems to be less help offered by government for companies to achieve these targets.
Jonathan, just also looking at some of the ambiguities that many companies have been complaining about, do you think that we are in the right direction at this point in time? Or do you think perhaps it's created a little bit more uncertainty? Because as you and Peter were alluding to earlier, we need to get clarity on various definitions.
Yes, I mean, in some areas there is a bit more clarity. Beneficiation, which is a concept that the DMR developed to offset HDSA requirements, has been clarified in this document, and applicants for mining rights may qualify for up to 11% offset against their HDSA requirements. The difficulty is that there are some definitions which are problematic, and some which no form has been given to. One example that comes to mind is that the revised charter refers to a social development fund. It mentions the fund, defines the fund, but there's no indication of how this fund will be administered. And that leads to regulatory uncertainty and in turn to investor confidence declining.